So, it's finally been announced. Bloodborne DLC is coming on November 24th, and it's called The Old Hunters. I spy 7 new weapons, 5 new sets of attire, a couple of new bosses, and some lore implications, so let's dissect that trailer. Let's do weapons first, because it was the weapons that really grabbed my attention, and it was the weapons I could find a lot about just by watching those clips over and over again. So first up, let's talk about that circular saw blade, the pizza cutter, as some are calling it. What I find most interesting about this weapon is just how simple that one-handed form appears to be. When you look really closely at it, it's just this thin iron bar with a flat, sharpened end. But this bar is then lengthened and jammed between the thick circular saw, forming this two-handed variation that is slammed down on Amelia towards the end of the trailer. I'm actually really curious to see the moveset of this weapon, because what can you do with a thin iron bar for the shortened form, and how do you wield a pizza cutter when you're trying to decapitate enemies? I'm not sure. Next to appear is this fascinating fiery warhammer. It's probably the closest thing we're going to have to the Lucerne from previous games. This is the only time it appears in the trailer, but there's a lot to be gleaned from this short little clip. Now, assuming that the character here is tapping L1, which it looks like he is, you actually see that he clicks open the back half of the hammer, which ignites in contact with the air and then lends fire to your next attack. And I say next attack because you'll notice that the long shard of metal behind the hammerhead only appears in this frame here, just after he activates the fire, and then it clicks closed again after the attack is finished and the fire goes away. So, unlike the Tonitrus, where you tap L1 and the effect remains for a while, L1 for the fiery warhammer appears to be lending a burst of fire damage to your next attack. The head of the hammer is also not solid. It's got these holes for the fire to burst through upon contact. So that's my theory on this weapon. Moving on, we have what I'm going to call the Scythe Cleaver, and I call it that because it's a mixture of the scythe and the very standard saw cleaver weapons. The shortened form is similar to the common saw cleaver, except without the serrated blade, and it extends to this simple, straighter scythe than the one that we're used to. It appears twice in the trailer, with a similar moveset to the saw cleaver and the saw spear weapons that currently exist, so it's pretty standard and kinda boring. And the next weapon, though, oh boy, this looks awesome. It's a bow in Bloodborne, where we have guns. But I'm gonna use the bow anyway, it's amazing. And if the DLC blog post is to be believed, it's technically a bow blade. They call it Simon's bow blade. And from the visuals, it's most logical to assume that the bow sort of folds together to form a twisted sort of sword, or perhaps it's another dual-wielding weapon. Now, since a bow has a really bent structure, it's possible that it transforms into a twisted sword, and there is a twisted sword later in the trailer, but the shapes of the sword and the bow are quite different, so while I initially thought they might transform together, they do seem distinct from one another. This twisted sword is represented alongside a shield, and it's a shield that isn't just a plank of wood, which is nice. Next we have what I'm going to call the Chain Cleaver. I'm just coining phrases left and right here. Its moveset is similar to the threaded cane, which extends like a whip when you swing it. But this weapon's a little bit different. It looks significantly heavier and more like a bludgeon type of weapon. And from a look at those solid metal pieces here, it looks as if the weapon can be condensed down into more of a bludgeon type of weapon. Here's what I came up with after about 10 hours in Photoshop. That looks kinda legit. Next we see a weapon that we're all familiar with. It's the Beast Claws. They're not that great in the current game, but it looks almost like they're getting a buff in the expansion. So the character here is performing a dive attack that doesn't exist in the current game. So how does this attack come about? Well, I hypothesize that it's got something to do with the character being more beast-like. You look at the character here, and he has fur on his back and his shoulder that extends way more than it used to in the current game. So the Beast Claws was a weapon that whenever you hit an enemy, you get a bit of beasthood. So maybe when your beasthood meter is fuller, you get access to another move, or something like that. I think it could be a clue that beasthood is becoming a more developed mechanic, which is something a lot of people have always wanted, and I'd wager that that's what you're looking at here. And finally, we have this clip of a hunter fighting the abhorrent beast in the Forbidden Woods, and his weapon in its shortened form is this simple one-handed pike, you know, like a spear, but the metal spike at the tip can rotate perpendicularly, and it can clip to become a long pickaxe type of weapon. I'm gonna call it the pikeaxe. And that pretty much does it for weapons. So let's move on to attire, and we'll go over it pretty quick. There's these 3 hunters in the intro, one of which is touting the biggest hat we've seen since Dark Souls 1. There's a character you spot briefly here on the right, later in the trailer, wearing a red garb with puffy pants. And then the most curious outfit to me is this one. It's worn by the guy who's wielding that circular saw blade. And look at that helmet, it's like a metal bucket. Does that look familiar? So, story-wise, the DLC is said to be set in a nightmare world where hunters from the past are trapped forever. The PlayStation blog mentions that we will be learning the tale of hunters who once made Yharnam their hunting grounds, and we'll experience the nightmare of hunters who once guarded Byrgenwerth's darkest secrets. So there's a lot of buzzwords there, but I guess the question is that, how did the hunters of the past get trapped here? Could this DLC be taking place in another nightmare realm, similar to Mensis, where characters of the past have been ripped to another realm? I guess that's my theory until we have anything better. But another interesting thing is the time of night. In Bloodborne, the colour and the size of the moon has always indicated what world phase that you're in. Currently in the game, there is afternoon, evening, night, and the blood moon, and each of these indicates the passing of time as you go through the night of the hunt, and the enemies and the environment changes as you go through this night. This shape in the sky of the trailer doesn't look like a moon though, it looks more like a sun to me, or a sort of distorted rift, and it hangs over the city of Yharnam, indicating to me that the old areas of the game could be changing a bit as well. Think about it, this expansion might be more than just adding a new area. It could intend to alter the enemies and the environment of the existing world, giving us a new phase to explore the world in. And I kind of think this is likely, considering we see an alternate version of the sewers with blood going through the ground and corpses, and we also see the Lumen Flower Gardens with new NPCs, and finally, not to mention the Flaming Cleric Beast, who is an alternate version of an existing enemy, so we could be seeing some revamping going on, which is pretty hype. But the main boss of the DLC has been teased to be Ludwig, who was once the first hunter of the Healing Church. And yeah, that's pretty much everything we know about the DLC. It sounds really good so far. I think that more weapons means more longevity, and that's great, because the one thing that Bloodborne lacks is that longevity and the variety that the Souls series offers. So, you know, weapons is a good way to solve that. There are 2 little weapons in the current game, but I'd also like to see some better PvP areas and maybe better Covenant rewards and stuff that you really have to earn. That's something that Bloodborne lacks, and I really hope that's something Bloodborne adds. But what are you looking forward to? Let me know. Subscribe if you want to keep on top of everything Bloodborne related going forward. I'm really craving some new content. Sometimes it's tough just doing Souls, but yeah, I just can't wait to jump into it with you guys, explore it all, and I'll see you all in the next video.